Now, for Shalom Bayit, peace within our homes is one of the central values of Judaism. The goal of any family is harmony, which is derived from honesty and mutual respect, honoring of differences, and conflict resolution. A synagogue is similar. A congregation needs harmony. And when I came to the New Reformed Temple 12 years ago, the congregation was in a little bit of turmoil about our former rabbi. And because of the maturity of the synagogue, and I mean that seriously, the maturity of our leadership, all of that was resolved. One of my fundamental rules of the rabbinate in general and the New Reformed Temple specifically is nothing is worth a congregational rift. Those rifts can become toxic and always destructive. The New Reformed Temple has a lot of dignity. The people are very civil, and that is one of the reasons I value my position at this temple. And I speak about this to a lot of people. I say, okay, there are a lot of different congregations in the community. They're all wonderful, but one of the things that I really like about our congregation is there's a level of dignity and civility to it. Some people like it, some people don't. I happen to like it. But last week, there was what I call the Challah uprising of 2023. If you were not here or you were watching online, you missed it. It was amazing. Here is what transpired. We made Kiddush. And then I designated Glenn to make motzi. He gelled his hands all over. He took our challah knife, which, by the way, is a gift from the Landi family, and I'll mention that every week until we get another one, followed by the standard ritual, and he cut the challah. And it was noted by some more vocally than others, why don't we rip the challah anymore? It didn't become a rumble, but there was some excitement. And I found this event to be very positive, and I'm being very serious. But first, let us understand the ritual, the overwhelming custom to cut a challah. And this is a little bit more detailed, Glenn, than you've ever heard before, and so I want you to know this. If you go to a Jewish museum, in any Jewish museum I've ever been to, in the United States, in France, in Berlin, in Israel, if you go to a Jewish museum and you see a challah board, there's always a challah knife next to it. It's not some kind of mysterious thing, this challah knife. There is a knife for circumcision, and there's a knife for challah. They're not the same ones. So this is a normal choreography. We recite the blessing on 2 whole loaves. And this is reminiscent of the double portion that was given to the Israelites in the desert, manna given on Friday, twice double, so they would collect it. Before beginning, the challah should be covered above and below. The cutting board suffices as the below, and the embroidered cloth over is typically used above. A small scratch should be made with the knife on the challah you are cutting, marking off where you plan to cut. Glenn, remember that. Okay, that's something new. Before reciting the blessing, both challahs should be lifted and held. You recite the blessing. You put the challah down. You take one of the chalot, where earlier you had made a scratch, and you take and you cut it. The person saying the blessing takes the first piece for themselves, since you shouldn't be involved in distributing a food that you first haven't said a blessing and eaten it yourself. There is a custom to have salt on the table for every bread meal. This is because the table of the Jewish home is compared to the altar of the temple, and the sacrifices were already salted. We don't have salt this week, but the Messiah is coming, and we might have it next week. But what about the cutting? One explanation for the cutting is the fact that a knife is used because ripping it open makes a person seem like a ravenous animal. Eating after tearing it apart, and it lacks manners, hence the knife. More importantly, but let's get down to something really technical. The Shulchan Aruch is the great code of Jewish life. It's still studied today. And in describing the cutting of the challah, it uses the root chatach, to cut 4 times. Cutting is done, the last time I heard, with a knife. And if the Shulchan Aruch would have required us to tear apart the bread, it would have used a different expression, kara, like kriya, before a funeral burial service. You cut your cloth or ribbon. It's called kriya. That is ripping, not chatach. Okay, so why is this an important discussion? We're laughing about it, but it really is important because it illustrates something about Judaism. Rituals matter. Rituals give us structure. Rituals give us regularity and predictability. Rituals give us security. Shared rituals create community. And when we change a ritual, it causes some dissonance and some disharmony. It's not that rituals shouldn't be changed, but thoughtfully and deliberately. We need these rituals, including challah choreography. This is reinforced in the structure of our Torah portion this week. The 10th plague is announced, the plague of the killing of the firstborn. And then before it actually happens, before Moses actually makes it happen, 39 verses interrupt, describing the first biblical Passover Seder, including the roasting of the Paschal lamb and the breaking of the matzah. This before any 10th plague. And the Torah says of the Seder, it is an institution for all time to remember what happened. This story is fundamental. Without a ritual to preserve the memory, it's never going to work. The Exodus will be forgotten. It will not be preserved. And in my rabbinical experience, I get more questions about ritual than about theology. Even in a Reformed synagogue, especially in the Reformed synagogue. Should I cover my head or shouldn't I? How do I put a mezuzah on my door? Our dietary law is important. If we light candles in a synagogue, do I need to do it at home? Do Jews believe in cremation? What kind of glass do I need to break at the end of a wedding? The list is endless. These rituals matter. They allow us to live our religion. Now, classical Reformed Judaism emphasized ideas over practices. They would not have had any discussion about challah because rituals weren't important to them. I strongly believe that they were completely mistaken. It says in our portion, and when your children ask you, what do you mean by this ritual, referring to the Passover Seder, it says, you shall tell them about the Passover sacrifice and the angel of death passing over the Jewish homes. You are teaching them something very practical. Now, the ritual is the message. So here are 2 scenarios that were suggested by a rabbinic colleague named Dr. Maurice Mizrahi. I don't know him, but he wrote this, and I want to share it with you. It's quite an interesting dichotomy. He says, in the first scenario, Jewish parents tell their child, there are 2 types of commandments, ritual commandments and ethical commandments. Ritual commandments are primitive and irrational. Ignore them, they're not important. But the ethical commandments, they're the soul of Judaism, the core, the essence. That is what we need to preserve and pass on. You don't steal. You must not murder. You must honor your parents. You must honor your neighbor as yourself. You must pursue justice. You must give charity. These are the eternal values of Judaism. That is what we are all about. And the child will learn them, and in time will respond, yes, Mom and Dad, I will treasure these values, live by them, and pass them on to my children. But I learned that these are universal values. It's not clear to me why, at this point, I have to stick a label Jewish on them. Who needs Judaism to be good? I don't need to be a Jew to practice them. All people do them. And what can the parents say? Because their children's logic is completely sound. And so several generations in the future, these parents will have no descendants who call themselves Jewish. Just a fact. Now, on to the second scenario. Jewish parents tell their child there are two types of commandments in the Torah: ritual commandments and ethical commandments. Both are important. Both must be preserved. You must not steal, but going to synagogue on Shabbat is also important. You must not murder, and you should also refrain from eating bread during Passover. You must honor your parents, and you must put a mezuzah on the doorpost of your house. You must love your neighbor as yourself, but you should study the Torah a little bit as well. You must pursue justice, but Yom Kippur is really important. You must give to charity, but it's great if you give your child a Hebrew name. In time, they will respond, yes, Mom and Dad, I will treasure these commandments, live by them, and pass them on to my children. The child can't say, why should I stick a Jewish label on these commandments? Because so many of them are uniquely Jewish. They are not found anywhere else. Such an interesting dichotomy Rabbi Mizrahi made. And that is what is glorious about our Challah rebellion. It showed the power of ritual even in our Reformed congregation. How deeply they impact us. Indeed, observing these rituals are what gives substance to our religion. And this is not only a discussion about Judaism, it's a discussion about the Jewish future, preserving Jewish behaviors from generation to generation. Rituals are powerful and they matter. And by the way, the Bukharan Jews ripped their challah. Shabbat shalom.